I'm going to show you a couple of different ways you can do a monoprint. A monoprint, well, in this case, we're tying it into the dry point, but I could also do it just on its own. And since it's a one-off kind of thing, there's really no rules to doing it. What I've done in this case, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a dry point. I've started the dry point drawing. And I'm using that as a guide, right? This marks I've scratched into it. You can see it just faintly. And I've taken relief ink, just because it's easier to clean up, and I've rolled a very thin layer of kind of a violet. I mixed a little black in it, but a violet evenly over the whole thing. And what I'm now going to do, and I'm going to use Q-tips. See if I can do this and get out of the way of the camera. But I'm going to pick up the ink. So areas that I want to have kind of a light, there's light hitting on top of her hair. And I'm using these sharpened sticks to give me the really faint, tiny lines I want. Top of the ear. I can also go in with Q-tips. That's probably hard to see, but I can go in with Q-tips and start pulling up. And I'm doing this knowing that I'm going to be doing a black dry point print over the top of this. So you can see I'm pulling up the ink, kind of working negatively, almost as you would if you were had it starting with like a charcoal ground on a drawing. And you can see some of the dry point lines starting to show up. Sorry, I just bumped. I'm being a little gentle. I mean, I don't want to scratch the plex. So you can kind of see the direction it's going. I'm going to stop the video now and kind of finish it or get closer and then start it again at the very end, and then I'll show you the print. Okay, so here it is, pretty much finished using the Q-tips and the sticks, and I actually went back a little bit since it's so hard to control along the edge with a fine paintbrush. and kind of filled in a little bit with the ink. I'm soaking the paper just like I did when I printed the first little skull dry point last class. I'm not going to soak it as long because I don't want this ink to bleed. I don't want to lose all my really fine lines. The other thing I've got to do with the soaking of the paper is I've got to kind of keep track of the time because the paper swells when it's soaked. It gets larger. And you'll notice this when you start pinning up your prints to dry. They'll shrink and actually sometimes pull the push pins right out of the board. This one I'm going to let dry naturally because I don't want to stretch it out of shape since I'm going to print the dry point on top of it. And since I want to print the dry point exactly over the top of this, I want to make sure the paper swells for the same amount of time just before I print the dry point. So I'm going to keep track of how long my paper soaks, and when I print the dry point itself, I am going to soak it for the same amount of time, so the paper is the same size. So I'm going to go ahead and print it. Hopefully it turns out, and then I'll show you it when it's finished, or on the print. Okay, so here's the finished monoprint, and you can see my dry point lines. I lost a little bit of the light lines I had put in. I wanted them to be really thin. But what happened, the pressure was maybe, because I had it at the same pressure that I wanted to, because I wanted to print these dry point lines as well. And so it was maybe a little bit too much pressure for the thickness of the monoprint ink. But I'm going to clean the plate off, and I'll show you another way to do, like this is only the first step. I'm going to go back into the dry point, do some more work, and then I will print black on top of this. And it should stand out. I'm actually going to darken up some of these areas and that kind of thing, put a little more detail in it. So it should help to kind of punch it up a little bit. We'll see what happens. But I will do that on Thursday. I'll let this dry. I'm not going to pin it up, so when it dries, the paper's going to get all warped and that kind of thing. But it'll flatten back or relax again once I soak it to print the dry point. But if I pin it up so it pulls nice and flat or dries nice and flat, I'll stretch it out of shape so I will not be able to get the dry point to register. It will not drop right on top of this one. Okay, so that's one way to do it, and then I'll clean the plate and show you a second way.